Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to the Charity Fraud Awareness Week. This presentation is going to be taking place on the very important issue of bribery and corruption. Just to introduce myself, my name is Dave Carter and I am the Head of Counter Fraud for the British Council. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the Bribery Act itself, which is the piece of law which governs the management of bribery in the UK and beyond. So the first thing we need to remember is that the Bribery Act covers all UK nationals and companies and organisations and most of all charities anywhere in the world. It is a very powerful piece of legislation because it affects our behaviour not only in the United Kingdom but also the behaviour of those representing the United Kingdom overseas and across the world. It also, very interestingly, creates a corporate offence of failing to prevent bribery, or as opposed to an organisation or an individual being prosecuted for bribery themselves, it creates the fact that we as an organisation can be prosecuted for failing to prevent it from happening, which is a very strong and powerful piece of legislation. But, importantly, there is a defence, which we'll get to more in a moment. So first of all, what is bribery and corruption? So what you see there is the legal definition, which is giving or receiving a financial or other advantage to encourage that person to perform their functions or activities improperly, or to reward that person for having already done so. But that reward need not always be cash. It can be much broader than that. Could be services, could be holidays, could be all manner of different things. So it's not always cash, but sometimes it is. And corruption is a broader term, which is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. So now we know what bribery and corruption is. What are two common types that we see quite often? So the first is facilitation payment. So for example, a payment that is made to a government official when they're given money or goods to basically perform their duties of what they should be doing anyway, but they are asking for some additional money, service or goods in order to do that, or do it quicker. So that's a very, very common form of bribery. And also kickback is a very common term, which is an unofficial commission or a bung, or basically a brown envelope, or effectively some money given back in exchange for goods or services rendered. So very common around procurement, for example. So back to those defences. If the organisation is being looked at for the corporate offence of failing to prevent bribery, what they'll be looking for is to find out how much rigour the organisation has. So if we have very little work in this space, we leave ourselves wide open for prosecution. However, if we can show some of the following, it acts as a legal defence and protects the organisation from prosecutions of this nature. So first of all, you need top-level support. The tone at the top is vitally important across the whole of counter-fraud, but never more so when it comes to bribery and corruption. We need to prove that it is something that trustees and boards take very seriously, and that is not just rhetoric. There also needs to be some form of assessment of the risk. Obviously, some areas of the country and some areas of the world are more susceptible to bribery and corruption than others, as are certain different areas of work are more likely to be at risk of bribery and corruption. So there'd need to be an assessment done where we're looking into the kinds of work and programming that we do in order to see those areas which are most vulnerable and then we need to target our resources to prevent bribery and corruption in those locations. There also needs to be due diligence, by which we know who we're working with, we know who works for us, we're screening our employees, we know the contractors that we're working with, we know the vendors that we're buying from, we know that they take bribery and corruption just as seriously as we do. Then there's communication and training. It is vitally important to ensure that our staff are very aware of their responsibilities under the Bribery Act, and there can be no excuse for failing to comply. We can't just assume that all of our staff will know that, so the onus is on ourselves in order to ensure that they are educated and informed of this risk and the very real nature that it provides. Then we need to be monitoring to ensure that we can notify and notice bribery when it occurs, that we have a very open and transparent reporting process, including reporting to the authorities when required, and also we are regularly reviewing all of our processes. So one of the questions we often hear is, oh, it'll never happen to me. But there's some very high profile organisations here that said that it would never happen to them. So first of all, you have Smith and Usman. Now, they did not believe that they would fall risk of bribery and corruption, yet they did, and they were prosecuted by the authorities as they were bribing officials to secure overseas contracts. And the individuals from the company were in prison for 3 years for these bribe paying. Then the organisation Sweet Group plc, who are a construction company, they were fined £2.25 million for the corporate offence of failing to prevent bribery. Very high profile one, Rolls-Royce, who paid £671 million to the UK and the US authorities for bribery and failing to prevent bribery in some of their overseas operations, such as China, India, Indonesia, and others. Now, you may wonder what the other picture signifies, and yes, that is the humble potato. But it was a potato buyer for Sainsbury's that paid £4.9 million in bribes, which overcharged the supermarket by £8.7 million, who was jailed for 4 years for bribery offences. So this is a very real danger, and charities are on the radar of the authorities, as it is recognised that often we do not have adequate processes or controls in place, and sometimes there is an over-reliance on trust, which creates a false sense of security. A charity being prosecuted for Bribery Act offences is sadly inevitable, so make sure you've got your systems in place which will help prevent it being you. So finally, your checklist is: take it seriously, this is a risk. Have a zero tolerance policy and make sure that everybody knows it. Know your risks and manage them appropriately. Know who you work with, know who works for you. Inform and educate your staff. You cannot assume that they will know this. And report. Transparency is the key. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation on bribery and corruption. Thank you.